Well, we talked a lot yesterday about transfers, but specifically yesterday we talked about a transfer leaving and a transfer coming in. And obviously because that was some of the most relevant news that came up. Julian Duggar leaving Pitt via the transfer portal and Cole Gonzalez coming to Pitt via the transfer portal, coming from Oklahoma, but more relevantly coming from Western Carolina. But Duggar and Gonzalez weren't the only bits of transfer news that happened over the weekend, or basically since the last time we did a Morning Pitt prior to yesterday. There was other news as well, and quite frankly, I thought yesterday would be spent talking about the other transfers who were coming to Pitt, guys who committed basically since we recorded the Morning Pitt mailbag on Friday, some news and developments that happened there. But when the Duggar and Gonzalez sort of trade ended up happening, that became the biggest story and the thing we had to talk about yesterday, so it pushed back the other transfer conversations to today. So today we're going to talk about the other guys who are joining Pitt's roster for 2025. Cole Gonzalez is one of them, and he's a big one, and he's relevant because the quarterback situation is relevant and interesting to talk about. But these other transfers who are coming in are pretty interesting and relevant as well. One at arguably the biggest position of need, and another at a position that's not necessarily of need, but it's kind of interesting what this other transfer sort of represents and a different approach to the transfer portal. Because I think there's a couple of different ways you can go about the transfer portal. You can go for immediate need or you can go for roster building. I think some coaches are still holding on to the hope and belief of building your roster, not just through high school recruiting, but through the transfer portal, and not just for this year, but long-term over the course of 2 or 3 years. And I think that's what this other transfer represents. So 2 interesting guys, 2 interesting stories, 2 interesting developments to discuss. Let's get into a little bit more transfer conversation on Transfer Tuesday. I was going to make that a thing for like a week or two. Transfer Tuesday here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, Transfer Tuesday. I was going to do that, I think it was back in December. For like a week or two, we just talked about transfer stuff on Tuesday, as if we didn't talk about it on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday as well, and sometimes Wednesday nights, and sometimes Saturday, whenever. We talked about transfers pretty much all the time, and if you cover college sports, that's kind of all you talk about these days is transfers. I mean, yesterday on Panther-Lair.com, I put a new scholarship board out, kind of breaking down the numbers where everybody's at position-wise, and that ended up being a discussion about transfers because as I looked at the scholarship board, I couldn't believe what I could believe what I was seeing, but I saw some interesting things, some interesting data and stats and numbers about transfers. We'll actually talk about that in a minute. Here's a fun fact about transfers. I got lots of fun facts today, but here's one. I saw somebody, as people were recapping the NFL draft from this year, somebody pointed out that I think a higher percentage of players in the draft had transferred at some point in their college careers, higher percentage than what it was last year. I think it was in like the 30% range, 30-some% of all the draft picks transferred. And I thought that was interesting because somebody else had pointed out that in the first round, there actually weren't that many guys who had transferred. Most of the guys who got drafted, I think an overwhelming majority of the players who were drafted in the first round on Thursday night had been at their school, stayed at one school throughout their college careers. And I thought that was interesting. But then I looked a little bit more at it, and there's I think a really interesting outlier at quarterback. If you look over the last 2 NFL drafts, I think there were 8 quarterbacks taken in the first round, 2 guys this year and 6 last year. 6 out of those 8 were transfers. Like last year, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, yeah, there was one other I'm drawing a blank on. This year, obviously, you had Cam Ward, you had Jackson Dart. It was like J.J. McCarthy and Drake May were the only guys who didn't transfer who went as first-round quarterbacks. I think that position, and we talked about quarterbacks a lot yesterday, but I think that position tends to lend itself maybe even more to transfers. I think guys kind of cut and run a little bit more quickly. Oh, Michael Penix Jr. was the other one I was thinking of, the other transfer quarterback who was drafted in the first round last year. But I think those guys tend to cut and run, and I don't mean that in necessarily a pejorative sense, but they tend to cut and run a little bit quicker because only one guy is going to play, and you have a pretty good idea of where you are on the depth chart and the pecking order and whether or not your opportunity, how likely it is that your opportunity is going to come. And so I think a higher percentage of quarterbacks transfer than probably any other position. That's totally anecdotal by me. I have not done 1 iota of research on that, so don't go quoting it to anyone, but it feels that way, which that should be good enough, right? Certainly in the first round of the NFL draft, those numbers are sort of borne out, at least over the last 2 years, where 6 out of 8 guys were transfers, 6 out of the 8 quarterbacks who were drafted. That's neither here nor there. We're not here to talk about Cam Ward or Jackson Dart or J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix. We're here to talk about Justin Holmes and Zion Ferguson. Of course, before we do that, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and check out the website below, Panther-Lair.com, to get all the Pitt sports news on the 247 Sports Network. We have football, basketball, recruiting, transfer stuff. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And message boards where you can talk about all these things. We discuss these topics here on the Morning Pitt, and we discuss them on the message boards. And what's fun about that is we can actually go back and forth. You can hear what I have to say. I repeat myself a lot in all the different ways, articles, message board posts, videos, live streams, whatever it may be. But that's your chance to actually give some feedback and have a conversation on the message boards, where you find, I think, the best online community of Pitt fans, Panther-Lair.com. So Pitt got 3 transfers over the weekend, but we talked about one of them at length yesterday. So we won't discuss Cole Gonzalez. Instead, we'll talk about Justin Holmes and Zion Ferguson. And Holmes, we'll start with him. Senior tight end, guy originally from Eastern PA, New Tripoli. I forget what the high school was, Northwestern Lehigh or something like that. Somewhere out, along the Susquehanna or so. I don't even know if it's along the Susquehanna. I shouldn't say that. I feel like everything in Eastern PA is along the Susquehanna, but I grew up along the Susquehanna, so I feel like I can say that. You're either along the Susquehanna or the Schuylkill River, right? That's what it all comes down to. Maybe Shamokin Dam, because that's always fun to say. We always liked saying that in high school. But Justin Holmes coming to Pitt. He started his college career at Kent State, spent 2 years there, went to Marshall last year, and now he's back in the transfer portal, and he's coming to Pitt. He's a tight end, a little bit on the shorter side. I think he's about 6 foot or so. He played quarterback in high school. And what's really interesting to me, there's a few things that are interesting to me about Justin Holmes. First of all, we already identified tight end as the biggest need for Pitt in the transfer portal this spring. Jake Renda went into the transfer portal, and that cut down on the numbers, but the numbers weren't great to begin with. Scholarship-wise this spring, they had Jake Overman, Jake Renda, Malachi Thomas, who's a sophomore, and Max Hunt, who's an early enrolling freshman, and that's it on the scholarship roster. And so they needed to bolster that group. I think they needed to bolster that group even if Jake Renda was coming back. And when you take Renda out of the mix, not necessarily that he was a big impact, game-changing playmaker over the course of his career, but just from a numbers perspective, you'd like to have more than 3 scholarship tight ends, particularly if one of them is a freshman who has been on campus for all of 4 months, almost 5. And so that was probably the biggest need in the portal. And I think there's a question of what you're looking for when you go get a tight end, or what Pitt specifically was looking for when they went to get a tight end. What kind of tight end do they want to add? Obviously, if you could add, Antonio Gates or Jimmy Graham or somebody like that in their prime, you'd love to do that. But being sort of more specific, directed, and intentional, I think, for Pitt, really, they probably were focused on trying to find a blocker. Somebody who had experience as a blocking tight end, somebody who could go out and be a blocking tight end. I think Jake Overman showed himself, and I said this a million times over the summer or last season and through the offseason, that I think Jake Overman showed himself to be more useful as a pass catcher than I expected him to be, and maybe more useful as a pass catcher than the Pitt coaches expected him to be. And so you've got that option. I think Malachi Thomas, despite... He didn't exactly acquit himself nicely in the spring game. Lots of drops. It seemed like the ball just bounced off his hands way too many times. But I still think he's a good pass-catching option. I think he's a good player. And he's a guy who, played himself into, I think he played in every game last year. Sometimes on special teams and occasionally on offense. And so he obviously impressed the coaches enough to earn that playing time. And then Max Hunt he's a big receiver more than he's a tight end at this point in his physical development. And so you got the sense that maybe they were looking for someone who could be more of a blocker, and that's what Justin Holmes is. Justin Holmes in 3 seasons of college football, and he played a decent amount at Kent State and Marshall, more at Kent State than he did at Marshall, but still he played quite a bit, caught a total of 21 passes over the course of 3 years for about 199 yards, 31 total targets, and most of his receiving work I think out of his 21 catches, like 20 of them or something came in 2023, his second year at Kent State when he was a sophomore there. And so I don't think you're looking at Justin Holmes as a big pass catching option. You're looking at him more to be a blocker. And what's really interesting to me, I keep using that word interesting. That's going to be the word of the week, and I'm going to never say it again after this week. But what's really interesting to me is about the way that Holmes was used as a blocker. Because really, at Kent State and at Marshall, he was used primarily as a run blocker. I wrote down all of his stats. In his career, he played, according to Pro Football Focus, between 2 years at Kent State and 1 year at Marshall, he played a grand total of 792 offensive snaps. 430 of those were run blocking snaps. So leaves about 360, right, of his other snaps. What did he do on those other 360 snaps? 273 of them, he was running a pass route, not pass blocking. So less than 100 pass blocking snaps over the course of 3 years. He was running routes. He only got targeted 30 times on those 273 pass routes, but that's what he was doing. He wasn't staying in the block for the quarterback. He was getting out and running routes, or he was run blocking. Why is that so interesting to me? Because that's almost exactly the role that Pitt had for its tight ends last year with Gavin Bartholomew and Jake Overman, excuse me. Listen to these numbers. Last year, Gavin Bartholomew and Jake Renda. Again, this is all according to Pro Football Focus, how they log the stats. I think there can be differences of opinion about Pro Football Focus and their subjective ratings and rankings and how they evaluate guys. But in terms of logging the stats and what guys did on each particular snap, I think they're largely trustworthy. Let's take these numbers for what they are, though. So Bartholomew and Overman last year, according to PFF, played 990 offensive snaps. Of those 990 offensive snaps, they actually, like, 2/3 of them, they were running pass routes. 615 pass route snaps. 347 run blocking snaps. Combined, Overman and Bartholomew combined last year for 27 pass block snaps. Now, I actually, and I remember this about last year because as the season went on and there were bigger issues with the pass protection, particularly as the offensive line got banged up and shuffled around, there was a lot of questions of like, why not use the tight end more? Why not keep them in the block more? And so I looked it up on Pro Football Focus to say, well, what are they doing? Are they using these guys to block? Or are they sending them out on pass routes? And I remember noticing that, like, oh my God, these guys never pass block. 27 snaps between two players over the course of 13 games. I mean, you're talking about, like, if you consider that they both played 13 games, 26 games played, right? 26 man games, if you want to call it that or whatever. 27 pass block snaps. They never did it. They were either blocking for the run or they were running pass routes. And so Holmes, I think, is interesting because he fits in to that kind of mold. Now, Holmes did a lot more run blocking than he did pass routes. I guess he just came off the field probably a lot on passing plays, or Marshall and Kent State didn't throw the ball, whatever it may be. But the point is, he wasn't doing a lot of pass blocking. And last year, Pitt didn't ask its tight ends to do a lot of pass blocking. So it's interesting to see that fit there. I'll be interested to see how Holmes is used. Like I say, he's a little bit shorter than some of the other tight ends. Maybe he could be used more as an H-back, play out of the backfield, which they did a bit with Bartholomew, but not a ton. But I think you're going to see him in a blocking role, ideally opening lanes for Desmond Reed and the rest of the running backs to go out and make plays in the running game. Now, the other transfer they're bringing in, Zion Ferguson, is a cornerback. A guy coming in from North Carolina. He was a 4-star prospect out of high school in Gainesville, Georgia, and he was in the 2024 recruiting class. He was a true freshman for the Tar Heels last year, played in just 2 games, just on special teams, so he redshirted, and he's got 4 years of eligibility left. Went into the transfer portal this spring, and Pitt snagged him. And you look at it, and on first blush, you're like, corner. They need a corner? they feel relatively deep at corner. They've got Rashad Battle. They've got Tamon Lynham. They brought in Rashawn Murray. Shadarian Harrison was the most improved player of spring camp. Nigel Maynard and Davian Pritchard look really promising. They have young corners coming in. Like, they need a corner. And I get that question. I understand that. But I think what you're seeing here is kind of that other side of using the transfer portal. Whereas like Cole Gonzalez is brought in to help this year. Justin Holmes with 1 year of eligibility is brought in to help this year. Zion Ferguson, a little bit different because he's got 4 years of eligibility left, and Pitt has 3 senior cornerbacks. So they look pretty deep this year at corner. But next year, that's not going to be the case. Next year, that depth is going to fall off. The numbers are going to fall off quite a bit. And they'll bring in more freshmen, and they have a decent freshman class coming in now. But those numbers, particularly of experienced guys, it's going to fall off. And so you bring in Ferguson now, keep him happy. You don't want him to transfer in December, and that's always a possibility. But you bring him in now to be in a depth role, to play on special teams, to get on the field a lot, play every game, as a gunner or on the special teams in somewhere, and maybe occasionally get some defensive snaps, but get him in, get him learning the defense. And by next spring, when Battle and Lynham and Murray are all gone, and you're looking at Shadarian Harrison as a returning starter at corner or returning top guy at corner, you can pair him with this guy. If Zion Ferguson, lives up to his billing in terms of his recruiting ranking, you can now pair those two, and you've got some, you're not throwing a totally brand new guy out there. You're going to have a guy who's, a year or two older, and has that experience in the defense and has learned the defense for the past year plus. So you're kind of planning for the future. And I think it's funny because when we think about the transfer portal, we don't think about planning for the future. It doesn't feel like the kind of long-term investment, mechanism that we're sort of talking about here. It feels like you go get guys out of the portal to fill in holes right now. But you can also get some of these younger guys, some of these guys who, are maybe 1 year out of high school and they didn't play much of their first place, so they just found out that's just not the right place for them. You could bring them in and say, come here, we'll develop you, we'll help you grow. And, you might not play a ton this year, but if you stick with us, you believe in us, and, you let us coach you up, you're going to be ready in a year or two. And you're going to be good. You're going to be ready to go. And so it's interesting to see sort of the different side of the portal, or one of the different sort of uses or applications of the portal. Now, you got to have that guy stick around. You know what I mean? He can't go into the portal in December, or else that sort of ruins the whole plan. All you did was waste a scholarship spot for a year. But if he sticks to the plan and hangs around, then, well, you can do something there. You can, build for the future. All right, a couple other fun facts before I let you go. Put up a new scholarship board yesterday on Panther-Lair.com and came up with some interesting numbers. We currently have Pitt projected at about 83 scholarship players for 2025. More guys could be added. Obviously, if the House settlement is approved, they could go up to 105. So we're not as worried about that 85 scholarship limit anymore. But what's interesting to me is as I started breaking down some of these numbers, 83 scholarship players, 26 of them are guys who arrived at Pitt as transfers, either this year or in previous years. That's 31.3%. But that also includes all the incoming freshmen. There's 20 incoming freshmen, and obviously, they're not going to be transfers. They're guys fresh out of high school. So take them out, and you've got 63 upperclassmen on the current projected scholarship roster. 26 out of 63 is 41.3%. Not quite half of your roster, but a significant percentage. 41.3. Pare the sample size down to just seniors. Pitt, right now, we have them projected with 21 scholarship seniors. 17 out of 21, like 81% of the seniors on this roster came via the transfer portal. Every offensive scholarship senior on this roster came via the transfer portal. Every single one. There's 11, and they all came from the portal. Lest you doubt me, let me. I should have had it open here. I will read you Pitt's offensive scholarship roster. Cole Gonzalez, senior scholarship offensive players. Cole Gonzalez, Derek Davis, Desmond Reed, Sincere Lee, Deuce Spann, Raphael Williams, Justin Holmes, Jake Overman, Lyndon Cooper, Keith Gouveia, and Jeff Percy. 11 players. Every single one of them came out of the transfer portal. And then if you get over the defense, you've got a few guys who did not arrive from the transfer portal, but you also have Blaine Spires, Joey Zielinski, Damon Lynham, Rashawn Murray, Kavir Baines-Marquez, and Nile, the long snapper. The only scholarship seniors on this roster, currently as we projected for 2025, who started their careers at Pitt, Rashad Battle, Javon McIntyre, and Caleb Junko. That's it. And Battle is like a sixth-year guy. Junko arrived as a walk-on. It's McIntyre. If you look at the junior and senior classes, all the players who are junior and senior eligible, and you look back at the recruiting classes of 2021 and 2022 that should supply all the players who would either be juniors or seniors this year, Pitt signed 33 players in those two recruiting classes, 2021 and 22. 6 of them are still on the roster. 6. Javon McIntyre is the only one from the 2021 class. It's the new world. Nobody sticks around. Nobody hangs on for multiple years. Very few guys make it all the way to the end. This is what it is. And I don't know if every year your whole senior class is going to be made up of transfers, but it might. And maybe it probably will. We'll see. All right. I think that's about it for today. I'm sure we'll have plenty of interesting things to talk about tomorrow. We'll get into some hoop stuff because there was actually hoops news over the weekend as well. It wasn't just football transfer portal stuff. There was actually basketball transfer portal stuff in terms of somebody coming out of the portal. So maybe we'll get into that unless some other more interesting news develops. Look, it may be the end of April. We may be heading into May, and it feels like, wow, that's probably like a dead period in college sports. Nope. Stuff is going on, and we've got a lot to talk about. So make sure you stay tuned right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't forget to check out the website Panther-Lair.com. Thanks for watching the video today. I hope you had a great Monday yesterday. Enjoy your Tuesday, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.